Hey, hey, hey! This lecture is designed for the nervous system part 1, and I'm sure you're all so devastated to know that this is the last set of lectures that you'll have to listen to for the final exam. And make sure you know the final exam will be on nervous system part 1, chapter 10, nervous system part 2, chapter 11, and the chapter 12, the senses. And so go ahead and pull out chapter 10 notes and we'll get started. But in this whole exam, in the whole final exam for this whole part, we're going to talk about the nervous system and what it does and what it's made of. And I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite lectures of the year. Okay, the nervous system is part of the communication system. So we have the nervous system and the endocrine system, which you'll talk about in 202, that communicate for our body. So the brain communicates with muscles, and the brain communicates with glands through the nervous and endocrine system, but we're going to talk about the nervous system. So it's controlling and communication of the body. It sends not hormones, but it sends nerve impulses. And so that's, it's almost like an electrical signal. It sends an impulse with a chemical, not a hormone, but with a chemical, to other parts of the body. So the brain can send the signal, and really the body can communicate back, and that's how we can feel and see and touch and hear and all that. But it's made up of some blood vessels, connective tissue, but mainly nervous system. Okay, the nervous system is divided into two large groups. The central nervous system, which is in the center, you got that, and the peripheral nervous system, which is the nerves that leave the brain, cranial nerves, and nerves that leave the spine, spinal nerves, and travel out. And so highlight that. You want to know this whole slide. The central nervous system is made up of brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is made up of the peripheral nerves, the nerves that leave the brain and leave the spine. But don't just see cranial and think central nervous system, because those cranial nerves go all the way out, actually to the eyes and ears and stuff like that. We'll talk more about that in chapter 11. But here's a nice picture that really sums up some of what the brain does. Okay, so looking at this entry, you can sense things. Let's go back and get a color. You can sense things. You can see, you can taste, you can touch, you can feel, you can hear. You can smell. I think I said one of those twice. Anyway, you know your senses. So let's say you hear something, sensory. It goes in and your brain interprets it. So that's one thing that your brain does. It receives the senses. Okay, also your brain sends messages out. It sends messages out to muscles. Move, muscle, bend, arm, and, glands, things like that. If you look, so you can see that, it says to the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is things that we voluntarily do. We choose to bend muscles and things like that. Autonomic are things that we don't voluntarily do. Our heart rhythm, our breathing rhythm, our glands and hormones and all that, we don't control. So the nervous system sends signals to initiate things that we control and things that we don't control. And then one thing not pictured, which is, God, the neatest thing, the brain, so it receives, it sends, but it also interprets. And so, in the brain, we can think and make decisions and rationalize. Some of us are better at that than others, yes, but we can rationalize things. A really, really, really bad headache is a migraine. They can last anywhere from 44 to 72 hours. And a lot of times in women it's hormonal. Not necessarily, though. I've heard people say that chocolate triggers migraines or wine or whatever, but we've all heard of migraines. Okay, and these are the three, I just went over them, but this is This is it in writing. These are the three functions of the nervous system. You've got sensory, integrative, and motor. And I just really talked about those. But sensory, it's going to receive information from the outside, from your senses. Integrate function, that's the thinking, making decisions, that inside brain to brain communications with yourself, conversations with yourself. And then motor functions are going to be carried outward. And this is maybe my favorite part, I guess. The nervous system is made up of two types of cells. Neurons, neuroglial cells. So the neurons are the ones that really matter. I hate to say that about the neuroglial cells, but the neurons are the ones that actually send the impulse. They're the nervous system cells. When you think of, what the nervous system does, they do it. They send the nerve impulse. The neuroglial cells, they are just supportive cells. They're helper cells. They make the neuroglial cells be able to do their job. So they help do other things. So let's kind of look at those. Okay, on the neurons, I'm going to draw it out for you. You look at the slide and draw maybe. But a neuron is made up of a cell body. So that's your cell body. It's made up of one axon and many dendrites. Okay, so let me kind of label those. You've got the axon, that's the one long, highlight on your paper, highlight only one axon, highlight that. It's got the cell body. Okay, the cell body is this yellow part. So that way you won't get confused with what I'm labeling. And it's got these pointy thingies. Many, highlight the word many. A neuron may have many dendrites. So all of these, I'll make those blue. All of these dendrites are blue. It kind of looks like a sunshine, doesn't it? Okay, but this is what one neuron or one functioning system, this is one cell. This is the one nervous system cell. And so the axon, which I have labeled green now, the cell body and the dendrites. Okay, now what do they do? The cell body contains the nucleus, cytoplasm. That's what, when you think of a cell, it's got all the cell stuff in it. That's where the DNA is and all that. Nucleus, mitochondria. The dendrites, they have a pretty important job. The dendrites receive the stimuli. They receive the information. So you have dendrites, you have neurons running both directions. So you have some dendrites like towards the brain, some dendrites on the tips of your fingers, and they receive the signal, hey, I feel something. Or from the brain, hey, move that muscle. So dendrites highlight branched receptive surfaces. Receive. And then the axon, it's going to transmit or send. So the axon sends. The dendrites receive. And the cell body has all the other stuff inside it. Okay, so hang on, I'm going to pause the video and draw a little bit more. I just drew me another neuron there. But they line up like this. So the action potential, or I think the first notes called it, said the nerve impulse. So the nerve impulse, I'm going to go with purple here, is received by the dendrite. And then in the cell body, it's actually changed into an electrical or a charge, an electric charge, positive or negative charge. Okay, and then it's going to travel down the axon. Okay, now you can see I drew it this way on purpose. The end of the axon, which we actually call the synaptic terminal, it doesn't touch the next dendrite. So the signal has to jump from one axon to the next. dendrite. Has a jump, that gap is called the synapse. So the gap is called the synapse. And so it jumps that signal, which is really neat, that gap, which is really neat. Okay, let's go back to our video, our PowerPoint. But before I do that, I want to talk about one of the supportive cells, one of those neuroglial cells, and that's called the Schwann cells or the myelin sheath. If you're looking at your PowerPoint, it's going to be slide 11. But the axon is wrapped in cells, now red, called Schwann cells. And they're really important. So what they do is they wrap around the axon and they protect the axon, and they don't let the charge come out of the axon. If it were to come out, it actually burned the muscle. So it keeps it inside. And I like to think about the Schwann cells, there you go, like a rubber coating on a wire. If the rubber coating wasn't there, the electricity could come out. The electricity would not travel in this perfect straight path. The electricity may come out, burn your house down even. So the wires of electricity are wrapped in rubber. Well, the neuron axon is wrapped in Schwann cells. And all together, the Schwann cells are called myelin sheath. So Schwann cells or myelin sheath. Okay, so now we're going back to the PowerPoint. And that just basically says what I just went over, the cell body. It's got neurofilaments in there. Chemophilic substances, that's that little green you can see in the picture. It's got the dendrites, many, you highlighted many on this slide. Only one axon may have many dendrites. The axon, that's the long one. And then the Schwann cells, and we talked about myelin a little bit, but this next slide tells more about it. Okay, Schwann cells, there's a bunch of them all around the myelin, and they make, all around the axon, and they make up the myelin. Now, write this in really for just learning purposes. When you continue on, you'll know the difference. If a cell is wrapped in myelin, if the neurons are wrapped in myelin, that is white matter. So white matter is myelinated. It's got that myelin on it. Gray matter, which some of it's in the brain, it doesn't have that rubber coating. So the electrical charge can spread out fast and travel not in an organized path, almost like electricity on water versus in a rubber coating. And so when you're studying and you see gray matter versus white matter, you'll know the difference. White matter has the myelin around the axons, where gray matter doesn't. Okay, just some more supporting cells. Astrocytes, and this next picture really describes it great. The astrocytes, you can tell, are right here, and they connect the neuron to the blood vessel. So they allow the nutrients to come through, right? The food and the water and the oxygen to get to the nervous system. Okay, the next one looking at the slide is the oligodendrocytes. That's this yellow right here, over there. And the oligodendrocytes are myelinated, so they got the Schwann cells on the axon. They're just for structure, holding it tight, making it stand upright. The microglia cells, those are kind of like a snowflake right there. Those are the white blood cells. Phagocytic. They make sure that no bacteria get into the nervous system, which is very important. The next one is the epidemic, and they are right here, the epidemial or epidemia cells. And it says lines the cavities. And all of these cells are just supporting, they're helping the neuron transmit the impulse. So they're all just helping the neuroglia cells work together. Okay, we already talked about Schwann cells. They make up the myelin. Satellite cells support clusters of neuron cell bodies. Multiple sclerosis. What that is where your immune system is attacking the myelin sheath. So really painful. There is no myelin on the axons. It's being broken down by the antibodies. Okay, interesting, sadly. The neurons, normal cells, if you hurt your skin is going to replace itself with mitosis and grow back. If you break a bone, the bone is going to replace itself with mitosis and grow back. But for some strange reason, the nervous system, they don't do mitosis like skin and bones and muscles and, hair cells and all that. So mature neurons do not divide. Now, there may be those cases on TV, those extreme, unique cases where someone has a spinal injury and it does fix itself, and we say that's a medical miracle. The neurons don't, the book says, do not divide, but I know I've seen episodes on TV where they do. So brain injuries and spinal injuries are much more serious than muscle and bone and skin issues because the nervous system does not divide. But then the textbook goes on to separate it into the peripheral and the central. So your nervous system does do mitosis and divide and develop as we're growing, but then it doesn't repair, I guess is a really good way to word it. Okay, on the peripheral nervous system, it says if a peripheral axon is injured, there's a chance it may regenerate. But on the central nervous system, it says not likely. And that's really why this picture kind of explains it in the peripheral how it may. But that's really why brain surgery or spinal surgery or injuries to that area are so critical because they're not going to repair like skin and muscles and bones do. Okay, the synapse, that gap, I drew that in my picture. That's the gap between the axon, or it's really called the axon terminal, the synaptic terminal, the ending of the axon to the beginning of the next dendrite. So the synapse is a site at which the neuron transmits a nerve impulse. And one neat thing, it's got to jump the impulse. There are at least 100 neurotransmitters. Good news! A neurotransmitter is something that the brain makes and sends out a signal to the body. So it's created in the brain and then it sends it, to the muscle or to the gland or to whatever part of the body. But good news, you don't have to know 100 of those. You only have to really be able to identify acetylcholine. That's the chemical made in the brain, and it's sent through the neuron, and it says muscle flex. Flex the muscle. You want to know about acetylcholine. I did, however, pull this textbook, this chart from the textbook, but it goes through some of the more common, not all of them, but some of the more common ones. Acetylcholine first, and I'm just going to point out a couple of them, but the norepinephrine, that's like happy, just everything's going good, happiness. And they say that exercise actually releases norepinephrine and, on the next slide, endorphins. So exercise is supposed to make you happy. However, my mom says it doesn't her. I do think it does. Dopamine, that's happy. Serotonin, that's going to be sleep. And you can actually take serotonin over the counter. Histamine would be like your immune system alert or attacking or waking up. And so sometimes we'll take an antihistamine to get rid of a rash or sinuses. Anyway, nitric oxide, that's what you get at the dentist when you have a tooth filled. Okay, so what do the opiates do to the human body? We know that they're addictive, right? People have addictions to these drugs, morphine, heroin, codeine, opium, but they're painkillers, and you have to be really careful as we take them, because you get that high, that sense of happiness, and people become addicted. Drug addictions. And so just read through that. Interesting. And these are some diseases that you want to pay close attention to. This is on the test. So most of the tables are just there to summarize information, but I do want to point out some of these. So make sure that you study these for your test. I went through and highlighted some of them. So you want to be familiar, especially with the ones that I've highlighted. Epilepsy first causes seizures, and it's caused by excessive GABA. Leads to excess norepinephrine or dopamine. Huntington's, cognitive behavior. If you ever watched House, that's what the girl, 13 they call her, has on Huntington's, on House. Hypersomnia, that's excessive insomnia. And then Parkinson's disease, deficient dopamine. So tremors of hand, slowed movements, and muscle rigidity. And then I added one, so you know it's important to me, is the Alzheimer's disease, memory loss, and depression, but it's deficient, not enough acetylcholine. So look through those that are highlighted. Make sure you know those. But look at all of them, and you'll be able to understand the disorders. All right, I hope that was helpful.